My name is Victoria Ashworth, and I'm 73 years old. 3 months ago, I sat in my late husband's study in our family home in Charleston, South Carolina. Listening to my son Marcus tell me I was lucky to be here, he wasn't talking about being alive, he was talking about being allowed to stay in the house I'd called home for 47 years. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been planning my exit strategy since the day his new wife, Cassandra, moved in. And when I finally left that house, I left quietly, but not empty-handed. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to know that this story gets more shocking with every twist. If you're enjoying stories about family betrayal and justice, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps our channel grow. And if you have your own story about being underestimated by family, share it in the comments below. Trust me, after you hear what Marcus and Cassandra did next, you'll have plenty to say. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It started 6 months after my husband Robert's funeral. The grief was still fresh, like an open wound that refused to heal. I was sitting in the morning room, the same room where Robert and I had shared coffee every day for nearly 5 decades. When Marcus walked in with a woman I'd never seen before, "Mom, I'd like you to meet Cassandra," Marcus said, his voice carrying that careful tone adult children use when they're about to deliver news they know you won't like. "We got married yesterday, in Vegas." Cassandra was 38, 20 years younger than Marcus and 35 years younger than me. She had platinum blonde hair, perfectly manicured nails, and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She looked around our antique-filled morning room like she was appraising everything for an estate sale. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, extending a hand with rings I could tell were expensive, but not tasteful. "Marcus has told me so much about you. This house is absolutely gorgeous. So much history." The way she said history made it sound like a burden rather than a treasure. Marcus cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, we need to talk about some practical matters. With Dad gone, this house is really too big for just you. Cassandra and I have been thinking. I should have seen it coming." Then, the way he avoided my eyes, the way Cassandra's smile grew wider as she examined the Crown Derby china in the display cabinet, the way they'd already discussed my future without including me in the conversation. "We'd love to move in and help you manage everything," Marcus continued. "The upkeep, the finances, all those complicated estate matters. It would be our pleasure to take that burden off your shoulders." Burden, there was that word again. "I know what you're thinking. Surely my own son wouldn't try to push me out of my home." Well, stick with me, because what happens next will show you exactly why I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, and trust me, what I discovered about Cassandra's past would make your blood run cold. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying this story of family manipulation. Over the next 3 months, Marcus and Cassandra made themselves at home. They moved into the master bedroom, my bedroom, claiming the larger space would be better for the family dynamic. I was relocated to the guest room on the 2nd floor, the room we'd always reserved for visitors who weren't staying long. Cassandra redecorated with the enthusiasm of someone spending other people's money. She replaced Robert's leather armchair with some modern monstrosity she called statement furniture. She packed away my grandmother's quilts and replaced them with throw pillows that cost more than some people's monthly rent. She even suggested we update the family portraits in the main hallway. "These old paintings are so dark and depressing, Victoria," she said one morning over breakfast. "We should replace them with something more contemporary, more welcoming." The portraits she was calling old paintings included a 1847 oil painting of my great-great-grandmother and a Civil War-era portrait of Colonel James Ashworth, Robert's ancestor who'd built this house. They were worth more than Cassandra's car, but their real value was in the history they represented. the history she was so eager to erase. But what really opened my eyes was what happened when I went to visit my lawyer, Harold Pemberton. Harold had been handling the Ashworth family affairs for 30 years, and when I mentioned that Marcus and Cassandra had moved in to help, his face went pale. "Victoria," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something. Your son came to see me 2 weeks ago. He was asking very specific questions about your estate, about the house deed, about your financial accounts. He seemed to think he had power of attorney." My blood went cold. "He doesn't have power of attorney, Harold. I never signed anything like that." Harold's expression grew even more concerned. I told him that, but he seemed insistent. "He mentioned something about you being confused since Robert's death. He suggested it might be time to consider guardianship proceedings." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls of my own home like a ghost, remembering when these walls had echoed with laughter instead of whispered conversations that stopped. Whenever I entered a room, that's when I made a discovery that changed everything. In Robert's study, the room Marcus had claimed as his home office, I found a folder hidden behind some law books. Inside were documents I'd never seen before: applications for nursing home facilities, consultations with elder care attorneys, and most shocking of all, a preliminary real estate assessment for our house. Our house was valued at $28 million, but there was something else in that folder, something that made my hand shake as I read it. A background check report on Cassandra Mills, or rather, Cassandra Mills Thompson Rodriguez Williams. My daughter-in-law had been married 3 times before Marcus, and all 3 of her previous husbands had been older, wealthy men who died within 5 years of marrying her. The report didn't say the deaths were suspicious, but the pattern was unmistakable. I was her 4th wealthy widower's family member, and I wasn't planning to be her 4th victim. Oh, if only I had known what I was about to discover. The plan I was forming would expose not just Cassandra's greed, but something even worse. A pattern of manipulation that would make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. The next morning, I decided to test my theory at breakfast. I casually mentioned that I'd been having some memory issues lately. "Sometimes I forget where I put things," I said, watching their faces carefully. "Yesterday I couldn't remember if I'd locked the front door. It's probably nothing, but it's been worrying me." The change in their demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Marcus leaned forward with exaggerated concern, while Cassandra's eyes lit up with something that looked disturbingly like excitement. "Mom, that's exactly what we've been worried about," Marcus said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. "Maybe it's time we looked into some additional support for you, some professional help." "Professional help?" I asked, playing confused. "Memory care facilities," Cassandra chimed in helpfully. "They have wonderful programs now, very comfortable. And it would give you the specialized attention you need while taking the pressure off the family." The pressure off the family. As if I were some kind of burden they were nobly shouldering instead of the woman who'd raised Marcus and owned the house they were living in rent-free. That afternoon, I called my oldest friend, Margaret Beaumont. Margaret was 76, sharp as a tack, and had been my confidant through every major crisis of my adult life. When I told her what was happening, she was quiet for a long moment. "Victoria," she finally said, "you need to be very careful. I've heard stories, women our age being pushed out of their homes by family members who think they know what's best once you're declared incompetent. It's very difficult to prove otherwise. What should I do?" "You need evidence," Margaret said firmly, "and you need a plan. But most importantly, you need to be smarter than they think you are. They're underestimating you, Victoria." That's going to be their mistake. Margaret was right. Over the next week, I watched Marcus and Cassandra more carefully. I noticed how they whispered conversations stopped when I entered rooms. I noticed how Cassandra had started answering the house phone, telling callers I was resting or not feeling well. Today, I noticed how Marcus had started handling my mail, sorting through it before I saw it. They were isolating me in my own home, controlling my communications, and building a case for my incompetence. But they'd made one crucial error. They assumed I was as helpless as they wanted me to appear. What I did next was risky. Some might even call it dangerous, but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. And the trap I was about to set would reveal Marcus and Cassandra's true character in ways I never could have imagined. If you're loving this story of family betrayal and justice, hit that like button to show your support. I spent the next 2 weeks setting up my trap, and it was more elaborate than anything I'd ever attempted. First, I visited Harold Pemberton again. But this time I went early in the morning when Marcus and Cassandra thought I was still sleeping. I told Harold everything I'd discovered and asked him to help me create a fake document, a codicil to Robert's will that would leave a substantial inheritance to Marcus. But only if he could prove he'd been caring for me in my own home. The fake codicil was beautifully crafted, complete with official-looking seals and legal language that would fool anyone who wasn't a lawyer. It specified that Marcus would inherit an additional $5 million from a previously undisclosed investment account, but only if I remained in the family home under his care until my death, and only if I was declared mentally competent at the time of my passing. Then I did something that went against every instinct I had as a mother. I planted the fake document where Marcus would find it. I left it in Robert's desk drawer, slightly hidden but not completely concealed. Then I started dropping hints about memory problems and confusion, all while secretly recording conversations on my phone. Margaret had taught me how to use the voice recording app. Technology isn't just for young people. It turns out it took 3 days for Marcus to take the bait. "Mom," he said, bursting into the morning room where I was having tea. His face was flushed with excitement, and he was holding the fake codicil. "I found this in Dad's desk. Why didn't you tell me about this inheritance clause?" I looked at the document with carefully practiced confusion. "What is that, dear? I don't recall seeing it before." "It's a codicil to Dad's will. It says if you stay in this house under my care, and if you're mentally competent when the time comes, I inherit an additional $15 million from his investment portfolio." The greed in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't about caring for his aging mother. This was about money, always about money. "But Mom," he continued, and here's where his plan revealed itself. "There's a problem. If you're having memory issues, if you're not mentally competent, the inheritance clause is void. That's why it's so important that we get you the help you need. Professional care, somewhere you'll be safe and comfortable." Cassandra appeared in the doorway as if on cue. "We've been researching some lovely facilities, Victoria, places where you can get the specialized care you deserve while still ensuring that Marcus can. That the family finances are properly managed." I understood then. They planned to have me declared incompetent and placed in a care facility, which would void the fake inheritance clause and leave them free to sell the house and access my accounts. It was actually a clever plan, if the inheritance had been real, and if I had actually been as helpless as they thought. But I wasn't helpless, and the inheritance wasn't real. And I'd been recording every word of this conversation. Ladies, what happened next broke my heart in ways I didn't think were possible. Just when I thought I knew how low Marcus and Cassandra would sink, they found a way to go even lower, and they dragged someone I loved into it. If you have family members who've tried to manipulate you using your own love against you, you're going to want to hear this next part. Please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The lowest point came when Marcus involved my granddaughter, Sophie. Sophie was 22. Fresh out of college and had always been the light of my life, she was smart, kind, and had her grandfather's gentle nature. When she showed up at the house unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon, I was overjoyed, until I realized why she was there. "Grandma Victoria," she said. Sitting beside me on the sofa with tears in her eyes, "Dad told me you've been having some problems, memory problems. He's worried about you." My heart sank. They'd gotten to Sophie. "He showed me some things," she continued, pulling out her phone, "recordings of you seeming confused, forgetting things. Grandma, I'm scared for you." The recordings. Marcus had been making recordings too, but his showed only the moments when I'd been pretending to be confused, carefully edited to remove any context that would show I was acting, to someone who loved me, who was genuinely concerned about my welfare. They would be heartbreaking and convincing. "Sophie, sweetheart," I began, but she interrupted me. "Dad and Cassandra have found a really nice place for you. Sunset Manor. It's not far. And I can visit every day. They have activities and medical care." And she was crying now, genuine tears of someone who thought she was helping someone she loved. This was their masterstroke. They knew I would never fight Sophie. They knew my love for my granddaughter was my greatest weakness, and they were using it against both of us. "Dad says if you don't go willingly, he'll have to start guardianship proceedings. He doesn't want to, Grandma. But he says he can't let you hurt yourself by staying here alone. As if Marcus and Cassandra weren't living in the house with me. I looked at Sophie's tear-stained face and made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to have to let her think I was abandoning her in order to save us both from Marcus and Cassandra's manipulate. "Ian, you're right, sweetheart," I said, taking her hand. "Maybe it is time. Maybe I should go to Sunset Manor." The relief on Sophie's face was devastating. She hugged me tightly, whispering that everything would be okay, that she'd visit every day, that this was the best thing for everyone. Behind her, I could see Marcus in the doorway, and the triumphant smile on his face made me feel sick. He'd won. Or so he thought. He'd used my own granddaughter's love against me, and it had worked perfectly. But what Marcus didn't know was that Margaret Beaumont had been outside in her car for the past hour, recording everything through the open windows with a directional microphone her late husband had used for bird watching. Margaret had also been busy making some calls on my behalf, calls to people who could verify that I was perfectly competent and had been acting on my own careful plan. Margaret was right. And I knew it, but I had come too far to back down. Now, what happened at Harold Pemberton's law office the next day would change our family forever, and the look on Marcus and Cassandra's faces when they learned the truth was worth every moment of poi. And I'd endured. Get ready for the most satisfying confrontation you've ever heard. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. on Friday at Harold Pemberton's law office on King Street. Marcus had requested it, thinking he was going to finalize the paperwork for my admission to Sunset Manor and establish his power of attorney. He brought Cassandra, their lawyer, a slick-looking man named Davidson, and even Sophie, who was there for moral support. What Marcus didn't expect was who I brought. Margaret was there, of course, along with Harold, but I'd also invited Dr. Rebecca Chen, my physician for the past 15 years, who could testify to my mental competence. Detective Ray Morrison from the Charleston Police Department, who'd been very interested in Cassandra's marital history, and most surprising of all, James Parker, a private investigator who'd been working on my behalf for the past 3 weeks. The conference room fell silent when we all filed in. "Mom," Marcus said, looking confused and a little panicked. "What's all this? I thought we were just signing some paperwork." "We're signing paperwork," I said, settling into my chair with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Just not the paperwork you expected." Harold cleared his throat and opened a folder. Before we begin, I need to address some irregularities that have come to light. Marcus. You told your mother that you found a codicil to your father's will in his desk. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. The inheritance clause. I'm afraid that document is a forgery, Harold said calmly. There is no such codicil to Robert Ashworth's will. And there is no undisclosed $15 million investment account. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's impossible. I found it in Dad's desk. You found it where your mother placed it, Harold continued. Mrs. Ashworth has been perfectly competent throughout this entire ordeal. She's been working with me to document your attempts to have her declared incompetent and removed from her own home. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Marcus, would you like to hear some recordings? You've been making them of me, so I thought I'd return the favor. I played the conversation from 3 days earlier, where Marcus and Cassandra had discussed their plan to use my supposed incompetence to void the inheritance clause while still gaining access to my estate. Their voices filled the room, crystal clear and utterly damning. The problem is, if she's not mentally competent, the inheritance clause is void. Marcus's recorded voice said, that's why it's so important that we get her the help she needs. Professional care, somewhere she'll be safe and comfortable. Sophie gasped. She'd never heard this part of the conversation. Detective Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Rodriguez-Williams, he said, addressing Cassandra by her full married name. We've been in contact with authorities in Florida, Texas, and Nevada regarding your previous marriages. Would you like to explain the pattern of wealthy older men in your romantic history? Cassandra had gone completely white. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 previous husbands, James Parker said, consulting his notes, all significantly older, all wealthy. All dead within 5 years of marriage, all left substantial estates to their young wives. That's just coincidence, Cassandra stammered. Maybe, Detective Morrison said. But we've also discovered that you approached Marcus Ashworth specifically after researching his family's financial status online. You targeted him, Mrs. Rodriguez-Williams, and through him. You targeted his mother. The room was deadly quiet. Except for Sophie's quiet crying. She was staring at her father with a look of betrayal and horror that broke my heart. Harold cleared his throat again. Now, about the paperwork we're actually here to sign. Victoria, would you like to proceed? I nodded. Marcus, I'm giving you a choice. You can sign this document agreeing to annul your marriage to Cassandra, return any money or items you've taken from the house, and agree to have no contact with me for 1 year while we work through family counseling. In exchange, I won't press charges for attempted fraud, elder abuse, or conspiracy charges. Marcus whispered. Alternatively, I continued, Detective Morrison can arrest both of you right now. The evidence we've gathered is more than sufficient for prosecution. Davidson, Marcus's lawyer, was frantically writing notes and whispering to his clients. After a few minutes of heated discussion, he addressed the room. My clients would like to accept the first option, he said quietly. Marcus looked at me across the table, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden and tell me I was the best mom in the world. That little boy was still in there somewhere, buried under years of greed and Cassandra's manipulation. Mom, he said quietly, I'm so sorry. I don't know how it got this far. I don't know what I was thinking, but I could see in his eyes that he did know. He'd been thinking about money, about inheritance, about taking what he thought should be his. The apology was real, but so was the greed that had led us to this moment. 6 months later, I was sitting in my morning room, my real morning room, restored to exactly the way Robert and I had decorated it, having coffee and reading the newspaper when Sophie knocked on the door. Grandma Victoria, She called softly, "Can I come in?" She'd been visiting every week since that day at Harold's office, slowly rebuilding our relationship and trying to understand how she'd been manipulated. It wasn't her fault. Love had made her vulnerable, and Marcus and Cassandra had exploited that vulnerability ruthlessly. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, setting down my newspaper. "Come have coffee with me." Sophie settled into Robert's old chair. I'd bought it back from the estate sale where Cassandra had sold it, and accepted a cup of coffee with hands that still shook slightly whenever she talked about what had happened. "I saw Dad yesterday," she said quietly. "Marcus was living in a small apartment downtown, working as a junior associate at a law firm and trying to rebuild his life without Cassandra's influence. The annulment had gone through without contest, apparently. Cassandra had already moved on to her next target. A widowed real estate developer in Savannah. How is he?" I asked, because despite everything, Marcus was still my son. He's different, smaller, somehow, like he's finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. Sophie looked at me with eyes that were older than her 22 years. "He asked me to tell you that he understands why you can't see him yet. He said he needs to prove he's changed, not just say it." I nodded. The 1-year no-contact period had been my idea. A cooling-off time that would allow Marcus to get counseling and figure out who he was without Cassandra's manipulation. Family therapist Dr. Sarah Williams had agreed it was necessary. Some relationships need time and space to heal properly. "Grandma," Sophie said carefully, "can I ask you something? Anything? When you set up that whole plan, when you pretended to be confused and planted that fake document, were you scared?" I considered the question carefully, terrified, I admitted, not of Marcus and Cassandra, exactly, but of losing my family. Of having to choose between protecting myself and protecting the people I loved. But you did it. Anyway, I did it because sometimes protecting the people you love means making them angry with you. Sometimes it means letting them think you've abandoned them. Sometimes love looks like betrayal from the outside, but it's actually the most loving thing you can do. Sophie was quiet for a long time, sipping her coffee and looking out the window. At the garden where her grandfather had taught her to plant tomatoes, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been smart enough to figure it out," she finally said. "If you really had been confused and helpless, they would have destroyed you, wouldn't they?" "Yes," I said simply, "they would have. That's what makes me the angriest. Not that they tried to cheat you, but that they were willing to destroy someone they claimed to love for money." Dad always told me that family was the most important thing, but when it came down to it, money was more important to him than his own mother. I reached over and took her hand. "Sophie, your father lost his way. Cassandra was very skilled at manipulation, at making him believe that taking care of me meant taking control of my life. But the man who raised you, who taught you about family and love, that man is still in there. The question is whether he can find his way back. Do you think he can?" "I have to believe he can, sweetheart, because the alternative, believing that my son is truly capable of destroying his own mother for money, that's not something I can live with." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two women who'd been through hell together and come out stronger on the other side. Finally, Sophie spoke again. "Grandma, I have something for you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I know it's not your birthday or anything, but I wanted to give you this." Inside the box was a simple silver locket, engraved with the words "stronger than they think." "I had it made," Sophie explained, "because that's what you are. That's what you taught me to be." I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling its weight settle against my heart like a promise. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." As Sophie prepared to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Grandma, do you ever regret how you handled everything? Do you ever wish you'd just gone along with their plan? I looked around my morning room, at the Crown Derby china back in its rightful place, at Robert's chair where Sophie had been sitting, at the family portraits restored to the hallway, where they belonged. I thought about the alternative, sitting in a sterile room at Sunset Manor, visiting hours limited. My home sold to pay for care I didn't need while Marcus and Cassandra lived off my life's work. Never, I said firmly. I may be 73 years old, Sophie, but I'm not done living yet, and I'm certainly not done fighting for the people and things I love after Sophie left. I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled back into my chair with a satisfied smile. Outside my window, the garden was in full bloom, Robert's roses thriving under my care, just as this house was thriving now that it was truly mine again. My son had told me I was lucky to be here. He was right, but not in the way he'd meant. I was lucky to be strong enough to fight back, lucky to be smart enough to outwit people who thought age meant weakness, and lucky to have people like Margaret, Harold, and Sophie who believed in me when I needed them most. But Marcus and Cassandra, they were the ones who were really lucky. Lucky that I'd decided to handle this quietly through lawyers and annulments, rather than criminal courts and prison sentences. Lucky that I'd chosen justice over revenge, healing over destruction. They were lucky I'd left quietly, because if I'd chosen to make noise instead, their lives would have been much more difficult than they were now. Sometimes the most powerful thing an underestimated woman can do is prove just how wrong people were to underestimate her, and sometimes the quietest exit makes the loudest statement of all. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. I know it wasn't easy to hear about family betrayal and manipulation, but I hope my experience helps someone else who might be facing a similar situation. If you've ever been underestimated or manipulated by people who claimed to love you, please share your story in the comments. We read every single one, and your experience might help another viewer who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about finding strength in difficult times, and remember, you're stronger than they think you are.